first quarter report from the NBS GDP report showing that Nigeria's GDP declined by 2.98% in the first quarter of 2024. And joining me now to break down this data and, of course, put this data in perspective, especially for our viewers, Nigerians, who are wondering what these numbers really mean. I am joined now by an economic analyst, Gbolade Idakolo. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us on Business Daily.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Let us start off, with the foundations. We did see, like I stated, the GDP numbers come from the NBS showing that Nigeria's GDP declined to 2.98% in the first quarter of 2024. I will want to hear from you. What does this signify, for the overall health of the Nigerian economy?
It's very unhealthy for the Nigerian economy presently because you see that the production side of the economy is shrinking, and there is a high cost of doing business in Nigeria presently. And when there is not enough exports to be able to boost our GDP, there is no way we will not experience what we are experiencing presently. Most of the manufacturing sector are coming down because of high cost of doing business in Nigeria. We know the energy cost is unbearable. We know that some of them, if they have not packed out of Nigeria, they are laying off their staff because they are recording serious losses, which on some occasions are mounted because of the exchange rate differentials and the challenges of assessing exchange rate. There are so many conglomerates today in the last sector of the economy that for the first time in their history are recording heavy losses because of exchange rate differentials that has affected their profitability and their bottom line. So the economy is shrinking because the productive sector is not coming up as it should, and it has really affected the sector to the extent that the GDP is speaking out. So the government needs to boost the economy for us to have a positive effect going forward.
Well said there. But we will be looking at the specific sectors, from the agricultural sector to the manufacturing sector, oil sector, and every other sector after the break. My guest, Gbolade Idakolo, is on standby, so do stay tuned. And you're still watching Business Daily, coming to you live on Trust TV. And just before the break, we started our conversation on the recently released Gross Domestic Product report from the National Bureau of Statistics. And my guest, Gbolade Idakolo, is still with us. Thank you again for joining us on Business Daily. Let us move on now to, the oil sector specifically, which over time has been, Nigeria's mainstay for revenue generation. However, we did see the sector, show slight notable increase year on year. However, we did see a decrease in the first quarter of 2024. What does that say, especially with the performance of the oil sector, juxtaposing it with the performance of the services sector, which was the major contributor to the GDP?
The oil sector over time in the past 2 to 4 years have been witnessing decreasing investment. And also with decreasing investment comes lower production in crude production, because it's more investment in the sector that will improve the drilling of crude, and that will also improve our export potential, and it also help us to meet the OPEC quota, sometimes and even surpass it. We discovered in the past 2 to 3 years significant drop in investment, and which can also occasion to our recent loss of investment from Total to Angola instead of about $16 billion investment that would have been in Nigeria. So these are some of the factors that affected the growth of the oil sector GDP in Nigeria, and that's why you see that it's not measuring up, because we know that oil is our major revenue earner. But in the past few years, there has been significant decrease in investment in that sector. But this new government has started pushing for an advocating investment from joint venture partners and also new investors to see how even more blocks can be invested, and also production can come from them to increase our revenue. It's very unfortunate that we have a refinery, for example, from Dangote refinery, a private refinery, and that refinery, due to lack of ability to access crude, is importing crude from the United States. Nigeria, with the level of production that we are supposed to be able to service all both private and government refineries, but that is not the case. So these are due to the fact that the investment in oil and gas sector reduced drastically over the years. But this government is trying as much as possible to show up this investment to see how we can come up and it starts contributing significantly to the GDP once again.
Well said there. I would like for us to touch on the agri sector performance. I mean, we had seen a decline in the last quarter, but we saw, interestingly, some modest growth being recorded in this last quarter of 0.18%, and rebounding from the decline that we had seen, in the same quarter last year. What would you say are the key contributors to the agricultural sector? Because this came as a surprise to most people, but let us hear from you. What would you say are the key contributors to the agricultural sector? The growth that has been registered from the sector.
Yes, you see that there is a deliberate policy by the government to try as much as possible to increase agricultural output. And there was also a deliberate policy at the early stage or the early life of this administration as regards agricultural revolution in Nigeria, to ensure that every key sector of the agricultural value chain is enhanced. And the government is trying as much as possible to meet up with all the sectors to ensure that right from farming to logistics to improvement in their products are being undertaken by the government. And you can also see that the government is aggressive enough to continue to advocate for more investment in the agri sector. And that is why you are seeing the modest gains that agri is bringing to the table as GDP. The government is also trying as much as possible in the area of insecurity. We know what insecurity has done to our agricultural sector in the past. And the government is trying as much as possible to, even with the operation of forest guards and other security collaborations, to see that farmers can actually be able to go to the farm and also be able to produce accordingly. And some of the modest gain we are seeing now is a concerted effort of the government to battle food insecurity that we are facing in the country. For a country that is growing astronomically, we cannot afford not to have food security even at this time. And the government understands this, and that's why we are seeing the modest gain that we are seeing presently. So many achievements has gone into the area of fertilizer distribution, procurement of farm implements, and also collaboration with state governments to ensure that the agricultural value chain is moving. We might not start seeing a deliberate increase through agriculture on the GDP immediately, but in the next 4 years, if the government can sustain the tempo of what is doing presently, agriculture will be a major contributor to the GDP in the next 2 to 3 years.
And what are your thoughts on, food inflation? I mean, on one hand, we're seeing modest growth happen within the agricultural sector. On the other hand, we have seen skyrocketing food inflation. Can you tie or marry these two occurrences? What exactly is going on in the area of food inflation?
Yes, if you look at food inflation, you will discover that food inflation is tied to the logistics and services that agriculture provide. The logistics aspect, let's mention a few of them as transportation, that is procurement of raw materials for agricultural inputs, and movement of these products to the market have been impacted by high cost of petrol and diesel, for example. The dollar exchange rate has affected the cost of farming that the farmers are using, and all these costs need to be transferred to the end users. So, and that is why when these costs are transferred, like the transportation costs, the exchange rate differentials that has affected the cost of food, when it's transferred, then you see a situation where we have food inflation. And that is what we're experiencing presently. But just like I've always been advocating, Nigeria needs to do more in the area of agricultural production, to the extent that once we have enough to produce, export, the challenges that we're having as regards food inflation will reduce. Because what is really affecting food inflation is scarcity. And when there is scarcity, that is too much money chasing few products is going to cause drastic inflation. And the marketers themselves have enough reason to continue to increase the cost of food prices in the market based on cost of procurement, transportation costs, and the exchange rate input that is affecting their product. But as it be that as it may, if we continue to sustain the tempo in agricultural production and the other areas of improving on the agricultural value chain, food inflation will come down. I see food inflation coming down if Nigeria sustain the tempo in agricultural production.
Well said. We hope to see, like you've said, the sustenance of the tempo that has been witnessed so far. But I would like for us to touch on the non-oil sector, where we did see, growth being registered by 2.80% in the first quarter, with key contributions from the financial services sector, the telecommunications sector, and the manufacturing sector. But what comes to the minds of most Nigerians is, how can these sectors, be further supported to ensure that we continue to see the robust gains that have been witnessed in the past, in the long term?
Yes, these sectors you mentioned are also suffering from the problems of other sectors, but they have been resilient over time because of the determination to do business. The telecom sector, for example, is also experiencing huge cost overdrive that is affecting their productivity. When you look at the cost of production, their flow stations, their telecom stations, their masts and everything, the cost has astronomically increased. When you talk of this other, the banking sector, the interest rate is increasing due to the recent MPR policy of the central bank, and the cost of the funds at hand is shrinking as well. But they have been resilient over time because of the way they have approached the business in a positive way. One thing that I want us to know is that government, as much as possible, need to improve on the ease of doing business in Nigeria, because with that, it will help more investors to be interested in our financial sector, in our telecom sector, and these other sectors that have started showing signs of bringing more to the table through the GDP. So there is a volatility in doing business in Nigeria presently. So those that are doing well or making profit are doing so by their own ingenuity, looking at what they have on ground. They are making do with what they have to be able to churn out those impressive figures. So the government needs to support in that area. And key areas of support is making available good infrastructure that would drive economic growth. Infrastructure in the area of energy, good road transportation network, and also security, so that anyone that is coming into Nigeria, for example, we know that their investment will be secured. You cannot ask an investor, for example, that is coming from anywhere in the world to say, okay, come and go and invest in Haiti, for example, or Gaza in Palestine, and the person will be willing to go. So because of insecurity. So Nigeria must ensure that the rate of insecurity reduces drastically to be able to encourage investment to come into the sector. So these areas, energy, production of enough logistics and road network, and insecurity nipping in the bud is very important for business to thrive in Nigeria.
In a few days, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu will be, marking his 1 year in office, and seeing the policies that, have been put in place so far, especially towards growing the Nigerian economy. I will want to hear from you. What is your outlook for Nigeria's growth and the performance of, Nigeria's economy in, I would say, 2024? And this is especially, as we have seen policies so far being introduced. And what would you recommend to be your key strategic areas that you will, advise the president to focus on?
Yes, the government at the early life of this administration brought out some key policies that it feels that would turn around the economy. But you discover that these policies have not come up as fast to turn around the economy as we expected. Instead, it has increased in the land. When we look at the removal of the fuel subsidy, for example, and the exchange rate liberalization that was embarked on the government, yes, it brought more revenue to the federal government, and it brought more to the table for both the federal, the state, and the local governments to share. But we have not seen it manifesting on the table for Nigerians. We have not started seeing the results coming up as we expected. The government also rolled out some policies that we had hoped that it would have been effected, or they would have been perfected in the last 6 to 7 months. But we are just seeing them coming up now. Policies like the compressed natural gas kits, conversion centers, and even these CNG buses. These are policies of government that should have come up for us to be able to start that can directly affect the masses and also boost their trust in the government. Also, we discovered that the central bank, in the bid to stem inflation, continue to increase the MPR to the extent that the interest rate now is out of the reach of SMEs and even some manufacturing companies that need to take a loan to do their businesses. We have seen that the continuous increase in the MPR for the past 3 consecutive times has not really yielded the downward trend of the inflation. So the central bank and even the Ministry of Finance need to look directly into their monetary and fiscal policies to ensure that they are in tune with reality, so that we can be able to move forward in that regard. So when you look at the administration of the Bola Tinubu administration, is early in the day to grade them adequate. But in the first 1 year or 10 to 11 months thereabout, we have not really enjoyed the dividend. Although the government has told us to be patient, but I don't know for how long our patience is going to last. But in the past 1 year, their performance, to me, my own personal opinion, has been below average. And I would have expected that the government that came on a renewed hope mandate would have been more passionate than they were. Because even within this first 1 year, we saw that the government tried to show insensitivity in allowing some agencies of government and private sector to bring arbitrary increase in their services to the Nigerians that are already reeling in acute poverty and hardship. The government, to me, shouldn't have allowed the electricity tariff to be increased, and if not for the public outcry, the cyber security fee would have come to stay. These are, to me, insensitive of the government, even at this time, that the Nigerian people need more from their government. It's good. These policies that the government have brought out, like the subsidy removal, the exchange rate differentials, has benefited the government. It has increased the government revenue, but it has not been felt down the line. And that is a challenge that the government needs to look to as they mark and begin their second year in office. And the government needs to aggressively implement people-oriented policies to be able to douse the tension that is in the land. Because a hungry man is an angry man. So the government needs to look into this.
Indeed, the government needs to look into, having people-oriented policies and ensuring, a balanced and inclusive growth across all sectors. Thank you very much, Gbolade Idakolo, for all the insight you have reeled out on today's edition of Business Daily.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, this is where we draw the curtains on this episode of Business Daily. But join the conversation on social media. Let us hear your thoughts on the recently released GDP report coming from the National Bureau of Statistics, showing that Nigeria's GDP declined to 2.98%. So let us hear from you. Drop your comment and your thoughts on the social media handles. My name is Chiamaka Enendu. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.